You've worn the ribbon. You've donated the $10 at the checkout counter. You've sat in a waiting room that smells like hand sanitizer and fear, watching someone you love disappear behind a curtain. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet question has probably formed. If humans can land robots on Mars, why can't they cure cancer? It feels like a puzzle nobody has cracked yet, like the answer is out there, just waiting for more funding, more brilliant scientists, more time. But the real answer is far stranger than that. Cancer isn't a disease you haven't solved. It's evolution, running the exact same program it has run for hundreds of millions of years, inside you, right now, while you read this. To understand why, you have to go back, not centuries, not even millennia. You have to go back roughly 600 million years to a moment when life on Earth made a fragile and dangerous deal. Maybe you've read the statistics. Roughly 1 in 2 people will face some form of it in their lifetime. Billions of dollars poured into research every single year for decades. Nobel Prizes awarded. Entire careers spent staring into microscopes. And still, no single pill, no single vaccine, no single moment where a scientist stands at a podium and declares it finished. That absence starts to feel suspicious after a while, doesn't it? Like maybe the effort has been misdirected, or the funding has been wasted, or someone somewhere is dragging their feet. None of that is true. The real reason is written into the deepest layer of biology itself. Older than humans, older than mammals, older than bones. Before that point, every living thing on the planet was a single cell, and every single cell followed one rule: survive, copy yourself. Take whatever resources you can find and multiply as fast as possible. There was no cooperation. There was no such thing as a body. There was only competition, cell against cell, forever. Then something changed. Cells began sticking together. They began specializing. Some became skin, some became muscle, some became neurons, quietly firing thoughts you'll never notice. And for that arrangement to work, every single one of those cells had to agree to something almost unthinkable. They had to stop competing. They had to stop multiplying on their own terms, and instead multiply only when the body as a whole needed them to. Grow when told to grow. Divide when told to divide. Die, quietly and on schedule, when told to die. That agreement is called multicellularity, and it is the single deal that makes you possible. Your heart doesn't decide to beat faster out of ambition. Your skin doesn't decide to grow an extra layer because it feels like expanding. Trillions of cells, cooperating, suppressing their own ancient instinct to multiply without limit, all so that one larger organism, you, can walk around, fall in love, forget where you left your keys. But here's the strange part. That instinct never actually disappeared. It's still sitting inside every one of your cells, encoded in the same DNA that built you. Cancer is what happens when a single cell breaks the deal. It stops listening to the signals that say, stop dividing. It reverts to the oldest program life has ever known, the one that predates skin, predates organs, predates you. Grow, copy, survive. Nothing else matters. In 1976, a pathologist named Peter Nowell proposed something that reshaped how scientists understood this process. He argued that a tumor isn't a single broken thing, it's a population. A tumor behaves like its own miniature ecosystem, made of cells that mutate, compete, and get selected for, generation after generation. Exactly the way species do in the wild. The cells that happen to divide a little faster, or hide from the immune system a little better, or survive a round of chemotherapy a little longer, are the ones that get to reproduce. Their descendants inherit that advantage. Nowell called it clonal evolution, and it means something unsettling. A tumor isn't a static lump waiting to be removed. It's a living, evolving population, adapting in real time to whatever you throw at it. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's the same process that turned wolves into dogs and finches into 12 different species across the Galapagos. Natural selection doesn't care whether it's acting on an island or inside a human liver. It only cares about one thing: which version survives long enough to make more copies of itself. There's a strange, real-world example of this that has been sitting in laboratories around the world for over 70 years. In 1951, a woman named Henrietta Lacks was treated for cervical cancer at a hospital in Baltimore. A sample of her tumor cells was taken without her knowledge. a practice that would rightly be considered a serious ethical violation today. But something about those particular cells was unusual. They didn't die on schedule in the lab dish the way normal cells do. They just kept dividing and dividing. Scientists named them HeLa cells, and they are still multiplying in laboratories today, used in research on vaccines, radiation, and yes, other cancers. In a strange way, one woman's tumor cells broke the ancient agreement so thoroughly that a piece of her biology has now outlived her by more than 70 years. That's not immortality in any comforting sense. It's a demonstration, in the clearest terms possible, of what a cell looks like when it fully reverts to the oldest rule in biology and simply refuses to stop. This is why chemotherapy sometimes seems to work brilliantly at first, and then stops working months or years later. The treatment kills the vulnerable cells. But if even a handful of cells happen to carry a mutation that resists the drug, those are the ones left standing. They multiply, unopposed, into a new tumor built entirely from survivors. You haven't just been fighting a disease. You've been running a selective breeding program for the most dangerous version of it, without meaning to. You've probably seen a version of this exact pattern somewhere else. Bacteria exposed to an antibiotic behave the same way. Kill off 99% of a population, and if even a tiny fraction happens to carry resistance, that fraction inherits the entire colony. That's why doctors warn you to finish a full course of antibiotics instead of stopping the moment you feel better. Stop early, and you haven't cured the infection. You've bred a stronger one. Cancer runs on the identical logic, just inside a single body, instead of across a population of microbes. A targeted drug called imatinib, developed to treat a form of leukemia by blocking a specific faulty protein, worked so well at first that it was hailed as a landmark. Years later, doctors began seeing patients relapse, their leukemia cells having evolved a slightly altered version of that same protein, one the drug could no longer grip. The tumor hadn't been defeated. It had adapted. In 2000, two researchers named Douglas Hanahan and Robert Weinberg published a paper that became one of the most cited in the history of cancer research. They called it the hallmarks of cancer, and in it, they identified the small set of biological tricks that almost every cancer cell independently evolves, no matter where in the body it starts. It learns to ignore the signals that normally tell a cell to stop growing. It learns to resist the self-destruct sequence, called apoptosis, that healthy cells trigger when something goes wrong inside them. It figures out how to trick nearby blood vessels into growing toward it, feeding it oxygen and nutrients like a parasite wiring itself into the plumbing. And eventually, some cells learn how to break away entirely, travel through the bloodstream, and rebuild themselves somewhere else in the body. That final trick is called metastasis, and it's the one that turns a localized problem into a lethal one. What's remarkable isn't that cancer cells can do all this. It's that they don't need to be taught. Every one of those abilities already existed somewhere in your genome, left over from thousands of ancestors, billions of years of trial and error. Cancer doesn't invent new tools, it just remembers old ones. A biologist named Mel Greaves has spent much of his career arguing that cancer should be studied less like a mechanical malfunction and more like an ecological and evolutionary event. In his view, every tumor is a Darwinian process compressed into a single body over a single lifetime. And that reframing changes what curing cancer would even mean. You cannot simply kill every cancer cell once and call it finished, because the moment you apply pressure, whether that's a drug, radiation, or your own immune system, you are creating a selective environment. Something usually survives. That is not a failure of medical science. That is exactly how evolution is supposed to behave under pressure. There's an even stranger idea circling this problem, one proposed by physicist Paul Davies and astrobiologist Charles Lineweaver. They suggested that cancer might not just resemble ancient single-celled life. It might actually be a kind of biological throwback, a reawakening of genetic programs so old they predate multicellularity itself, sleeping quietly in your cells until something wakes them up. Under this theory, a cancer cell isn't broken, it's remembering, reaching back past the 600-million-year-old contract that built you, all the way to a time when cooperate with your neighbors wasn't yet a rule any cell had to follow. So, if the seeds of cancer are baked into the same biological toolkit that allows you to grow, heal a cut, or regenerate skin after a burn, then the uncomfortable truth becomes clear. You cannot fully remove the risk of cancer without removing the very mechanisms that make you alive. Cell division, mutation, growth. These aren't glitches in the system. They are the system. Cancer is the price of complexity. And yet, here's what almost nobody tells you. Most of the time, you're winning. Every single day, cells inside your body accumulate DNA damage from sunlight, from ordinary metabolism, from the simple wear of being alive. Estimates suggest your body produces mutated cells constantly, cells that, left unchecked, could become the beginning of a tumor. Most never get the chance. A gene called P53, nicknamed by some researchers the guardian of the genome, patrols your cells looking for damage. When it finds a cell that looks dangerous, it can pause the cell's division, attempt repairs, or trigger that self-destruct sequence, apoptosis, before the problem spreads. Your immune system does its own patrol on top of that, recognizing and destroying abnormal cells long before they'd ever show up on a scan. You are, quite literally, a walking near-miss factory. Thousands of potential cancers, extinguished before they ever became a headline in your own life. The fact that you're sitting here, reading this sentence, breathing normally, worrying about ordinary things, means those defenses fired correctly today. And yesterday. And the day before that, for every day you've been alive. Your immune system deserves more credit here than it usually gets. Certain white blood cells, called natural killer cells, exist for almost no other reason than to drift through your tissues, checking for cells that look wrong. They read tiny molecular flags on a cell's surface, the biological equivalent of a face that doesn't quite match its ID. When something looks off, a natural killer cell doesn't hesitate. It delivers a chemical signal that tells the suspicious cell to self-destruct, quietly, before it ever gets the chance to multiply into something visible. T cells do something similar, patrolling with an even more specific kind of recognition, trained across your lifetime to remember exactly what normal is supposed to look like in your body. Multiply this process across trillions of cells, running continuously, every hour, for your entire life. And the scale of what your body is quietly managing becomes almost impossible to picture. Cancer isn't rare because it's hard to start. It's rare, relatively speaking, because your body is astonishingly good at stopping it before it becomes visible. What we call getting cancer isn't the beginning of a battle. It's the moment your ancient internal defenses finally lost one round, out of trillions. This is also why there will likely never be a single cure, the way there was a single vaccine for smallpox. Smallpox was one virus, with one weakness, exploitable by one biological trick. Cancer isn't one disease. It's hundreds, arguably thousands, of independent evolutionary events, each one arriving at similar tricks through different genetic paths, in different tissues, in different people. Curing cancer is a bit like asking for a single cure for evolution. The question itself doesn't quite fit the shape of the problem. That doesn't mean progress is a myth. Survival rates for many cancers have improved dramatically over the past few decades. Researchers have gotten remarkably good at catching some tumors early, before the evolutionary process has had time to diversify into resistant populations. Immunotherapies now train your own immune system to recognize cancer cells it previously ignored, essentially reactivating one of your oldest defenses instead of trying to bypass it. None of this is failure. It's just a different kind of war than the one most people imagine, fought less like a single battle and more like an ongoing negotiation with the same evolutionary forces that built every living thing on Earth, including you. Some researchers have even started borrowing strategies directly from evolutionary biology to fight back. Instead of throwing the maximum possible dose of a drug at a tumor and hoping to wipe it out completely, a handful of clinical approaches now do something closer to wildlife management than warfare. Deliberately withhold treatment at certain points. Let some of the drug-sensitive cells survive on purpose. Those sensitive cells compete with the resistant ones for space and resources. The same way two species might compete over limited food in a shared habitat, and that competition can help keep the resistant population from taking over entirely. It's a strange kind of ceasefire, using ecology instead of brute force. Nobody would have thought to try it if they were still picturing cancer as a single broken machine instead of a living, competing population. It also reframes what a diagnosis actually means. Not a factory defect, not a malfunction, waiting on a repair manual nobody has written yet. A negotiation, already 600 million years old, that has simply tipped for a moment in one direction. So the next time you wear the ribbon, or drop coins into a donation box, or sit beside someone you love in a room that smells like hand sanitizer and fear, you'll know something most people never stop to consider. You're not just supporting a search for a missing piece of a puzzle. You're supporting one side of the oldest conflict biology has ever produced, one that started 600 million years ago. The moment cells first agreed to stop competing and start cooperating. Cancer was never an invader arriving from outside. It was already in the blueprint, waiting. And every day your body wins that argument without you ever knowing it happened is not the absence of a cure. It already is one.